It was a scorching summer afternoon in downtown Atlanta. The streets were bustling with people, and the traffic seemed endless. Major General Michael Turner, a decorated and highly respected figure in the U.S. Army, was on his way to a charity event that aimed to support veterans. Wearing his full military uniform, his chest gleaming with medals that told the story of his decades of service to his country, he was no stranger to standing out in a crowd. He had seen combat in far-off lands, negotiated peace, and led thousands of soldiers through some of the most challenging times in modern history. But nothing prepared him for what was about to unfold on his way to a simple event in his own country. As Turner's black SUV approached a red light, he noticed a police car flashing its lights behind him. His driver, a younger sergeant named Kyle, pulled over calmly. There was no reason for concern. Turner hadn't broken any laws, and he assumed it was a routine traffic stop. The police officer, Officer Bradley, a tall, imposing man in his early 40s, with a permanent scowl etched into his face, approached the vehicle aggressively, his hand already resting on his holstered gun. Something was off. Bradley's body language screamed hostility. Kyle rolled down the window and greeted the officer politely. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Bradley's eyes barely registered Kyle. They were locked on Turner sitting in the back seat, in his military attire. "License and registration," Bradley barked, ignoring the pleasantries. Turner, always composed, spoke softly. "Officer, I'm Major General Michael Turner, United States Army. May I ask what the issue is?" Bradley's eyes narrowed, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Step out of the vehicle now," he ordered, his voice laced with disdain. There was no explanation, no request, just raw authority and something more, something malicious. Kyle hesitated, but Turner gave a subtle nod. "It's all right, Sergeant. I'll handle this." Turner stepped out of the vehicle, his tall, commanding frame towering over Bradley. But Bradley wasn't intimidated. If anything, the sight of a black man in such a high-ranking uniform seemed to fuel his anger. "You think that uniform means you're above the law?" Bradley sneered, stepping closer, his face inches from Turner's. Turner remained calm. "I respect the law, officer. I've spent my entire life defending it. Now, if you could explain what the problem is, I'm sure we can resolve this." But Bradley wasn't interested in explanations. His anger boiled over. "I don't care who you are. Around here, you follow my orders." Without warning, Bradley grabbed Turner by the arm, yanking him violently. Turner, caught off guard, didn't resist. "Officer, there's no need for this. I'm complying." But Bradley didn't stop. The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. He threw a punch, his fist connecting with Turner's jaw. The force sent Turner stumbling backward, hitting the pavement with a thud. A collective gasp from bystanders filled the air, but no one dared intervene. Kyle, still in the car, reached for his phone to record the incident, his hands shaking with disbelief. "Sir, we need to call for backup," he whispered, his voice trembling. Turner, his face bruised but his dignity intact, slowly got to his feet. Blood trickled from his lip, but he made no move to retaliate. He simply looked Bradley in the eyes, his voice steady. "You've made a mistake, officer." Bradley, panting with adrenaline, spat on the ground. "The only mistake here is thinking you could walk around in that uniform like you own the place." Before things could escalate further, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Multiple police cars swarmed the scene, and the officers inside quickly recognized Turner. They rushed to defuse the situation, horrified by what had transpired. Captain Sarah Henderson, one of the most respected officers in the precinct, stepped out of her car, her face pale with shock. "Major General Turner?" she stammered, disbelief clear in her eyes. "Yes, Captain. Your officer here seems to have misunderstood the situation," Turner said, wiping the blood from his face. Henderson's eyes darted to Bradley, who was now standing stiffly, his face twisted with anger and fear. She quickly ordered her officers to take Bradley into custody. The other officers hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react, but Henderson's authority snapped them into action. Bradley was cuffed and led away, his protests drowned out by the murmurs of the gathering crowd. As the chaos settled, Turner stood tall, his face bruised but his spirit unbroken. He turned to Henderson. "This is not just about me, Captain. This is about something much bigger. What happened here today is a reflection of a deeper issue that your precinct, your department, our country needs to confront." Henderson nodded, her expression serious. "You're right, Major General. We will investigate this thoroughly, The media quickly got wind of the incident, and within hours, the footage Kyle had recorded went viral. The world watched in shock as the news unfolded. A high-ranking black officer assaulted by one of his own country's policemen. The outrage was immediate. Protests erupted in cities across the nation, demanding justice not just for Turner, but for all the black men and women who had suffered at the hands of racist officers. Turner, always the leader, took to the airwaves calling for calm, but also for real, lasting change. His words resonated with millions. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for equal treatment, for the law to protect us as it should protect everyone. I fought for this country, for the freedoms we hold dear, but those freedoms mean nothing if they are not extended to all Americans. The case against Officer Bradley moved swiftly. Public pressure mounted, and it became clear that this was not an isolated incident. Reports surfaced of Bradley's history of racial bias, with complaints lodged against him by several civilians over the years, complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. As the trial loomed, Turner found himself at the center of a national conversation about race, justice, and the very soul of America. He never asked for this fight, but he was determined to see it through, not just for himself, but for every black man and woman who had been silenced, dismissed, or brutalized. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Turner sat with his legal team, his presence commanding as always. Bradley, on the other hand, looked pale and nervous, his bravado from that fateful day gone. The prosecution laid out a damning case, detailing Bradley's history of misconduct and racial profiling. Witness after witness testified to the officer's abusive behavior. But the most powerful testimony came from Turner himself. When he took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He spoke calmly, with the dignity and grace he had always carried. He recounted the events of that day, but more than that, he spoke about what it meant to be a black man in America, even one who had served at the highest levels of the military. Turner's words were like a mirror held up to the nation, reflecting the harsh reality that so many had tried to ignore. Turner paused, his eyes scanning the room before he continued, his voice filled with quiet intensity. I have spent my life serving this country. I've led troops into battle, negotiated peace in war zones, and stood by men and women from every background imaginable. But when I was on that street, wearing this uniform, it wasn't my rank or my years of service that Officer Bradley saw. He saw the color of my skin, and to him that made me a threat. The courtroom was still, every word Turner spoke weighed with decades of experience, but also with the painful truth of a lifetime spent navigating two worlds. One of honor and service, and the other of suspicion and prejudice. You see, I'm not here because I want to see a man punished. I'm here because this is a moment we cannot afford to ignore. This is bigger than one officer or one punch. This is about a system that has allowed people like Bradley to act without consequence, to judge a man before they know him, simply because of the color of his skin. Turner's voice grew stronger, more resolute. I fought for the idea that all men are created equal. I wore this uniform believing in those words. But how can we call ourselves a free and fair nation when millions of our citizens live in fear of those sworn to protect them? As Turner finished, there was a weight in the air, a heavy silence that followed his final words. The jury, the judge, the audience, all seemed to be grappling with the profound truths he had just laid bare. He stepped down from the stand, his head held high, knowing he had said what needed to be said, not just for himself but for generations of people who had experienced the same pain in silence. The defense, rattled by Turner's powerful testimony, tried to salvage what they could. They attempted to portray Bradley as a dedicated officer who had made a mistake in the heat of the moment. They claimed he was under stress, that he had misjudged the situation, but the damage was done. The truth was too obvious, the evidence too clear. As the trial neared its conclusion, the entire country held its breath. Turner had become a symbol, not just of the injustice he faced, but of the broader struggle for racial equality in America. His calm dignity and unwavering strength resonated far beyond the courtroom, turning him into an unexpected leader in a national movement. When the jury finally returned with their verdict, there was a palpable tension in the air. Bradley sat rigid, his face pale as the judge read the decision. Guilty on all counts. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom, but it was Turner's reaction that caught everyone's attention. He didn't smile, didn't cheer, didn't revel in the victory. Instead, he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Justice had been served, but he knew this was just the beginning of a much larger fight. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, holding signs, chanting for change. As Turner stepped out, He was greeted by applause, but also by a sea of hopeful faces looking to him for direction. He had become the reluctant leader of a movement that was gaining unstoppable momentum. Turner raised his hand to quiet the crowd. Today was one battle, but the war for equality is far from over. We cannot let our guard down now. We must continue to fight for a system that treats everyone with the fairness and respect they deserve. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us, together. The crowd erupted into applause, but Turner's mind was already on what lay ahead. He knew that systemic change would require more than one trial, more than one victory. It would require sustained effort, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, and the perseverance to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard the road became. In the months that followed, Turner became a national figure in the movement for police reform. His voice was one of unity, calling for change through peaceful but persistent action. His message was clear. The fight was not against the police, but against a system that allowed prejudice and racism to fester within its ranks. Officer Bradley's conviction sent shockwaves through police departments across the country. It was a warning that no one, regardless of their badge or position, was above the law. It also sparked a wave of introspection within law enforcement, with many departments beginning to implement reforms that had long been delayed. But with progress came resistance. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Protests erupted from those who felt threatened by the shift in power dynamics, and Turner found himself at the center of both praise and backlash. He received death threats, hate mail, and was even the target of several violent attacks. But he remained undeterred. One night, after a particularly heated rally where tensions were high, Turner returned home to find a small package on his doorstep. It was unmarked with no return address. His military instincts kicked in, but something told him this wasn't a threat. Inside the package was a letter. It was handwritten, shaky, but sincere. Dear Major General Turner, I was wrong. I've spent years filled with anger and hatred, and I've hurt people because of it. You were one of them. I've watched you since the trial, and I've seen the grace with which you've handled all of this. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm trying to be better, to understand what I've done and the pain I've caused. Bradley. Turner stared at the letter for a long time. The man who had assaulted him, who had tried to destroy him out of blind hatred, was now asking for redemption. Turner knew that real change would come not just from punishing the Bradleys of the world, but from helping them see the error of their ways. It was a slow, painful process, but if there was one thing Turner had learned in his years of service, it was that victory wasn't always achieved on the battlefield. Sometimes, it was found in the quiet moments of understanding, in the willingness to forgive, even when it seemed impossible. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Turner folded the letter, placing it gently in his desk drawer. The fight wasn't over, but perhaps, just perhaps, this was a step in the right direction. And as the movement for equality continued to grow, Major General Michael Turner remained at its forefront, a symbol of strength, resilience, and the power of change. As Major General Michael Turner read the letter once more, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to believe that Bradley's apology was genuine, that maybe the years of systemic racism ingrained in men like him could slowly be unwound. But another part of him was wary. He had seen this before, hollow apologies that offered no real change. Forgiveness was powerful, but only if it led to action, to true understanding. In the following weeks, Turner continued his work, speaking at rallies, attending meetings with government officials, and pushing for reforms in police training programs across the country. His focus was clear: to create a world where officers were held accountable for their actions and where racial bias could be eradicated from the system. But with each step forward came new challenges. The backlash grew stronger. Groups opposed to his mission became more vocal, organizing counter-protests and spreading misinformation about his intentions. The media began painting Turner in two drastically different lights. Some hailed him as a hero, while others labeled him a troublemaker, a man stirring division where there was once peace. Turner didn't let the criticism sway him, but the weight of it was heavy. His wife, Angela, had become his rock, standing by him throughout it all. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the chaos of the day had finally subsided, she would sit beside him, listening to his concerns, offering her unwavering support. "I just don't know if I'm making a difference," Turner said one night, his voice filled with exhaustion. "I feel like every step we take forward, we're pulled 2 steps back." Angela reached over, taking his hand in hers. "You're making a difference, Michael. Look at how far we've come already. You've inspired people all across the country." Change doesn't happen overnight, but it's happening. And you're leading the way. Turner nodded, appreciating her words, but still feeling the burden of the fight ahead. He had spent his entire career in the military, battling enemies overseas, but this was different. This was a fight within his own country, among his own people. It wasn't just about laws and policies, it was about changing hearts and minds. A few days later, Turner received an unexpected phone call. It was Captain Sarah Henderson, the officer who had arrested Bradley that day in Atlanta. Her voice was tense, as if she was about to deliver bad news. "General Turner, I hope you're doing well," she began, her tone formal. "I wanted to inform you that there's been some developments regarding Officer Bradley." Turner's pulse quickened. "What kind of developments?" "Bradley was recently released on parole," Henderson explained, "and he's reached out to our department, asking for a meeting with you. He says he wants to speak with you directly." Turner was taken aback. "He wants to meet me? Why?" "He didn't go into detail," Henderson admitted. "But from what I gather, he's been going through counseling and seems to be genuinely remorseful. He claims he's been trying to educate himself about systemic racism and wants to talk to you as part of his process." Turner hesitated. The idea of sitting face to face with the man who had assaulted him was unsettling, to say the least. But there was something in Henderson's voice that made him pause. Could Bradley truly have changed? Or was this another attempt to manipulate the situation? "I'll think about it," Turner finally said. "But I'm not making any promises." After hanging up, Turner spent the next few days wrestling with the decision. Could he trust Bradley? And even if he could, what would this meeting accomplish? He consulted Angela, his close friends, and even some of his fellow activists. Opinions were split. Some believed in second chances, while others warned that this could be a trap, a way for Bradley to repair his public image without any real intention of change. Ultimately, Turner's sense of duty won out. He had always believed that true leadership required listening, even to those who had wronged you. If there was any chance that Bradley had genuinely changed, it was his responsibility to find out. The meeting was arranged for a quiet afternoon at a neutral location, a small community center that had been one of Turner's first stops when he began his advocacy work. The room was simple, with just a few chairs and a table set up in the center. Turner arrived early, his heart steady but his mind racing. He didn't know what to expect. Bradley arrived shortly after, looking nothing like the arrogant Officer Turner had encountered that fateful day. He was thinner, his face gaunt, and his eyes filled with an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. His once confident stride was now hesitant, almost apologetic. Turner stood as Bradley entered the room, but he didn't offer a handshake. He wanted to see what Bradley had to say first. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then Bradley spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, General Turner." Turner nodded but said nothing. Bradley fidgeted with his hands, clearly nervous. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began, "but I want to try and explain. I was wrong that day. I was filled with anger, hatred, and all the wrong things. I've spent the last few months trying to understand why I did what I did, and it's been hard to face the truth." He paused, looking up at Turner, who remained stoic. "I'm not asking for a clean slate. I know I can't undo what I've done. But I've been working with counselors, learning about systemic racism, and I've started to see things differently. I grew up believing things about black people that were never true, but I never questioned them until now. And I know that's no excuse. I hurt you. I hurt others." Turner watched him carefully, searching for any sign of manipulation. But Bradley's voice cracked with what seemed like genuine emotion. "I don't expect redemption, sir," Bradley continued, his eyes brimming with tears. "But I want to make things right somehow. I've been volunteering at programs aimed at improving police-community relations. I've been attending workshops on racial bias. I don't want to be that man anymore. I want to be part of the solution." For the first time, Turner spoke, his voice measured. "It's not enough to say you're sorry, Bradley. Change doesn't come from words. It comes from action." "I know," Bradley replied quickly, his desperation evident. "I'm trying, I swear. I know I'll never make up for what I did, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Turner regarded him for a long moment. The room was heavy with the weight of their shared history, the punch that had changed both of their lives forever. Finally, Turner spoke again. "Actions speak louder than words. If you're serious about change, then show me. Show the world. It's not me you need to convince. It's everyone else who's been hurt by men like you." Bradley nodded, wiping his eyes. "I will. I promise I will." As the meeting ended, Turner walked out, feeling a mixture of emotions: anger, hope, skepticism. He didn't know if Bradley would truly follow through, but at least, for the first time, the man seemed willing to confront his demons. Back in his car, Turner sat for a moment, staring out the window. The fight was far from over. But if there was even a glimmer of hope that people like Bradley could change, maybe there was a future where the system itself could change too. And as long as there was hope, Turner knew he would keep fighting. In the weeks following Turner's meeting with Bradley, life moved at a dizzying pace. The media had caught wind of the encounter, and soon, the story of a former racist cop seeking redemption became a national sensation. Some praised Turner for his willingness to engage with Bradley, calling it a powerful symbol of the potential for change. Others criticized him, accusing him of being too soft on a man who had inflicted pain and perpetuated a toxic system. Turner, however, stayed focused. He knew that real change couldn't come from symbolic gestures alone. His message remained the same. Actions, not words, would define whether Bradley's transformation and the transformation of the justice system was real. Meanwhile, Bradley seemed determined to prove that his remorse was genuine. He kept attending the racial bias workshops, appeared at community events, and volunteered at organizations advocating for police reform. It wasn't easy. He faced backlash from former colleagues, who saw him as a traitor, and from some in the public who would never forgive him for what he had done. But Bradley pressed on, struggling to make amends in whatever way he could. Turner watched it all unfold from a distance. He had chosen not to stay in close contact with Bradley after their meeting, knowing that he needed time to see if the man's efforts were sincere. His own work continued to grow in scope, expanding beyond police reform and into broader efforts for racial equality. The movement was gaining momentum, and though there were still setbacks and opposition, Turner could feel a shift in the country's consciousness. One day, several months after their meeting, Turner received a call from a woman he didn't recognize. Her voice was soft but steady. "General Turner? My name is Maria Bradley. I'm Officer Bradley's wife." Turner felt a twinge of surprise but kept his voice calm. "How can I help you, Mrs. Bradley?" There was a pause before she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to thank you. My husband, he's different now. He's still struggling with everything he did, but I've seen the change in him. He's trying to be a better man. And I know it's because of you, because you gave him a chance to face what he did." Turner sat quietly, listening to the emotion in her words. "He told me about the meeting you had," Maria continued, "and I know it wasn't easy for you, but it meant something to him, changed him. I just wanted you to know that." Turner sighed, feeling the weight of her words. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Bradley. I'm glad to hear that he's making the effort. But remember, it's not just about me. It's about the community, about everyone who's been hurt by people in power. The real change comes when we all stand up and demand better." "I know," she replied softly, "but you gave him the push he needed. And for that, I'm grateful." After hanging up, Turner sat for a long time, staring out the window of his office. He thought about Bradley, about all the other officers who had gone unchecked for years, and about the countless victims of police brutality who hadn't received justice. It wasn't about one man. It was about a system that needed to be dismantled and rebuilt. Weeks turned into months, and Turner's work continued. The push for reform saw both victories and setbacks, but slowly, change was happening. Police departments across the country were implementing new training programs, emphasizing de-escalation and bias awareness. Body cameras became standard in many places, and there was a growing movement to rethink the role of policing in society. Bradley's story, however, quietly faded from the headlines. He remained involved in his volunteer work, but he no longer sought the spotlight. He had begun to understand that his redemption wasn't about public recognition. It was about the small, everyday actions that would eventually define the rest of his life. One evening, nearly a year after the trial, Turner attended a local community meeting. It was a small gathering of activists and residents, discussing how to improve relations between the police and the community. As he spoke with some of the attendees afterward, a familiar figure approached him. It was Bradley. He looked more at ease than the last time they had met, though the guilt and remorse were still evident in his eyes. He extended his hand, and this time Turner shook it. "I didn't come here to make a big scene," Bradley said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I know I'll never fully atone for what I did, but I'm trying." Turner nodded. "I appreciate that, Bradley. Just remember, this isn't about personal redemption. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. That's where the real work is. Bradley nodded solemnly. I understand that now. As they parted ways, Turner felt a strange sense of closure. The journey had been long and painful, filled with moments of doubt and anger. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope. Not just for Bradley, but for the entire system. And though the fight for racial equality was far from over, Turner knew he had already made a difference. The ripples of change were spreading, and he was determined to keep pushing forward, knowing that justice wasn't a destination. It was a constant pursuit. As the evening grew darker, Turner walked back to his car, the sounds of the city buzzing around him. The work would continue tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing that even in a world filled with injustice, there was always the possibility for change. One person, one action, one step at a time.